Nau mai ki tēnei puni I pāho. Welcome to this episode of Tū Kapu Tū Kōrero. Join Ari and I, Vinny, as we navigate love and life as partners and our wawata, our dreams for language within the home. In this episode, we dive into a heavy kaupapa. This is your content warning for a discussion about language trauma. Two things are important here. Firstly, come into this episode carefully, whānau. It's a deep topic that can invoke lots of emotion. Secondly, while we are going to navigate this as carefully as we can, we are still finding our way through the vocabulary of language trauma, so consider this as you're listening to meet us where we're at. Our kupu might not match your kupu. That doesn't mean we're setting out to be mean to you or overlook something. We're just trying our best. In this episode, you'll hear us use the phrase hea te mate, what's the issue or what's the problem? This is a slight adjustment of what we heard last time, hea te wawata, what's the dream? Mate, issue or problem. Hea te mate. You can use this at home with your children when they're upset, like this. Oh my darling, hea te mate. Alright, all this and more in this episode of Tū Kapu Tū Kōrero. Let's get into it. I've got some quick fire questions, and so all you have to do is follow my amazing instructions. And the first question is, yes or no, is language trauma real?
Yes.
In one word, where does it come from?
Yes. You said yes or no questions.
This isn't a yes or no question,
Okay.
but in one word, where does it come from?
Experiences.
Oh, nice.
Other people.
Nice. That's 3 words. But
Instructions not clear.
that's another 3 words. That's
Okay.
6 words in total.
Okay.
Yes or no, do you and I both feel language trauma today?
Yes.
In one word, is talking about language trauma colonizing or decolonizing?
Ooh. Both.
Nice. I was thinking like that's what I would have said.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to get ripped if I say the wrong one.
No, you're not. No, you're not. Okay. And in one word, what is the solve?
Unpacking.
Nice. That was so good. Okay, so now we're going to go back to them and we're going to talk about them some more. So quick fire questions. Is it real? Yes or no? You said yes.
Yes. No?
There's no wrong. There's no right or wrong answers. Why do you say yes?
Because I felt it. It's real.
Awesome.
You've felt it.
Yeah.
Lots of people have felt it.
Yeah, I felt it, but we didn't have a name for it when I was going through the bulk of it. So we didn't. We just felt
We
like
felt it.
shit,
Yeah.
but we didn't have a. We couldn't identify it yet.
What did you call it? Did you have a name for the feeling?
No, I just used to
Just say
just
it
get
just felt like
really
shit?
angry and like really angry for the fact that I had to learn my language, pay to learn my language. Like that actually really bugged me for a bit. I was like, why should I have to pay for this? Like this is costing me well over 60k. Because that's how much my degrees, my early degrees sort of cost. Like, why am I paying for this? Like this, I should have just, language is free.
I could have had it
Yeah.
for free.
Yeah, so there was that, and then on top of that, I was learning about like colonization and how it got taken away, and I could once I learned exactly how it got taken away from my family, I got like real mad.
I thought it was frustration. I don't think it was until either I met you. I don't know if I learnt the term language trauma before or after meeting you, but we'd had language trauma kōrero, and it wasn't until I learnt that phrase that it felt like a whole domino effect. It's like, yes, I felt frustrated at these moments in time, but I didn't connect them to all these other things that impacted that feeling at that time. And then it was just started reflecting and going further back, and then I was like, oh heck, it didn't start here, it started way back here. And that kind of blew my mind.
That's like, I'm going to jump questions, but that was like maybe relevant to your last answer, what's the solve, and your like domino thing, and your answer was like unpacking, which is like going back, which kind of like is a nice little, that makes sense to me. I reckon you're so right for someone who's been raised with experiences, that unpacking is going to be so important, because they've got experiences from their childhood or that they can now attach or look at through, the lens of language trauma. I didn't have those, and so I didn't have those experiences growing up because I was so removed from my language that I didn't have those childhood ones, so I don't have to unpack that series of events. I only had to unpack the fact that I never had it, and that feeling of loss was kind of hard, but it was one experience, a long one.
But that doesn't even, like when you was like, it was just one, that doesn't make yours any less, like it doesn't have any less power than mine or anyone else's. Like I think if it's language trauma, then like that's what it is, and it's really crap. And it's learning the term language trauma is one of the best things that I ever learned, because I got to name it, but it was also one of the worst things because you're right, it's become like a buzzword now, and like I wouldn't for myself want to use it as an excuse for things that like I wouldn't want it to be the reason why I don't do things all the time. Like yes, like it's hard, but I've worked really hard to unpack all those moments, and they'll always be there, and I don't think I'll ever get over them. Like there's still moments that if I think hard enough that make me really angry or make me sad or upset, but it doesn't stop me from wanting to learn, because I've made that decision in myself to do it.
I reckon you're right. Like I reckon it's really important that when we're having these discussions that people keep in mind that you can feel these things and not let it stop your progression.
Yeah.
Like you can go through all these things and keep progressing, and that might feel really hard and it might feel impossible, but you really can, and I think that's super important for people to keep in mind, because language trauma discussions quite often sit in a silo of people who are experiencing the same things and haven't been able to like see the forest for the trees. So I think that's such a great reminder that like you can actually keep progressing when you're in that space, and people don't hear that enough because they're in the silo, so they're not hearing that little bit enough, and I think that's really, really freeing. Having said that, people actually do need their silo time to actually just sit, so that they can sit in it, because you have to be able to sit in it. I've noticed people sit in it maybe a bit too long in my thing. And you mentioned that you had only learned it when you met me, and I think part of that is because it's actually that new. Like It is actually. I mean, it's a bit older than the time we've been together as a buzzword, but not that much, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been growing as a thing while we've been together.
Do you find that, like I when I said before, like I just thought about what I said, and I said I don't want to use it as an excuse. Like that's not to say that people, like that's not to like point at anyone or anything. Like this is just my own reflection for myself. But do you think that because it's used so much now, and people share their stories, and they're really difficult and they're really sad and they're really hard, do you think that some of it is not language trauma though? Like there's sometimes I read things or I watch things and I'm like, what I understand language trauma to be, maybe I wouldn't think that was. But do you think that there are just different understandings of it, or is there one way to see it? Like, does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Yeah, it does, and I think that there's going to be like two prongs to it. One is I think it's really, really like it's such a handy catch-all, and sometimes having a handy catch-all is really bad because you end up giving everything one name, and you actually need to give it like multiple if you're going to get rid of it, like, you know, because it becomes a little bit too catch-all, so it becomes a little bit more shallow in its application. So that's not always good. And then the second part about it is it becomes a really handy phrase for people to talk about, to legitimize and validate how they're feeling. The legitimizing and the validation, that's super important. Like, it's so important for people to be able to say, I feel this way, and not have someone come in and go, well, don't, you know, or calm down, or like any of those, like, it's so important for people to be able to have that time of validation. But the negative part comes when it's the only thing that is talked about. So what I see in my work anyway is a lot of the validation and the legitimacy talk around language trauma, which is so important. But I don't see like anywhere near as much out the other end of saying this is how you deal with it when you're ready and when you've had your validation time. It's like any process, you know, you have to have the validation before you can unpack it and then get to the solve, because you've got to be able to theorize your way through that and settle it in your head. I don't see a lot of the other stuff, and I think that's really sad, because what that does is it reinforces the idea in people's minds when they're in the validation point that there is nothing beyond that. So it kind of just serves to reinforce to people that there's no end. This is you're in the language trauma space and you'll never escape, which is not true. So like I don't love that about the language space. And then so that was the first one. The second one is the catch-all, and super handy to have a catch-all that you can just say this is what it is. But in our language revitalization climate, where language trauma is such a common thing to talk about, if we look further afield, we can see that there's lots of language learning complexities. Some of them are really hard. Some of them are like long. They take a long time to solve. Some of them are completely left field and would take you by surprise if you ever heard, you'd be like, whoa, I never thought that would be a thing that people could be confronted with language learning. So there's all those things that we experience here, but we don't call them that. We call them language trauma. So we're kind of like stuck in this space where there's 3/4 of the world is bilingual. And a lot of what they face, we face too, but we call it language trauma. They've got like real mean souls that we could pick up and use if we could call it something else. They've got names for it, you know. They call it, a lot of people call them language anxieties. I don't love that term either, to be fair, because anxiety is a really difficult concept in itself. But yeah, I wish we could have a more nuanced conversation than this catch-all term of trauma. If we could do that, we would just be left with the real core language trauma things, which I think would all boil down to colonization, and we could decolonize ourselves out of it. That was like such a long spiel. So.
No, it was good to hear, because I was quite curious what your thoughts were on, like, when I hear some other people's experiences of language trauma and they differ from my own, I'm like, well, because this is such a new term to me, and I know what it means for me, but what it might mean to them will be different from me, and I might think in myself like, oh, that doesn't seem like language trauma to me, but that's not to say that they're not feeling the same as me. So like, my thinking was like, is language trauma just applied differently to the particular person, or does it actually mean this one thing and everyone's kind of adopted their own, like they've changed the actual meaning of it to mean whatever they've decided?
There's no real set definition, and I think part of that is maybe to do with the fact that it's pretty new, so people haven't like landed on a definition yet, so that might be a thing. It's just not old enough yet to have a set one, but I think your first inkling about it's just got a lot of applications is also true. Like, I think that each individual person could have their stuff. Yeah. I think the sad part is some of that stuff doesn't need to be under that mantle of language trauma, because it's you know, like a really great example is there was a lot of people who took up learning Māori over COVID, and are experiencing some complexities around learning a language, and they've kind of gone down the path of calling it language trauma, but actually was learning online, you know, learning through a Zoom camera, through a web camera, in itself brings about like 10 different learning complexities that if you aren't geared up for them, you are going to be hit with them. They're going to confront you, they're going to be really hard, and that's happening.
Technology trauma.
Yeah, and actually what I have had to say to the odd person is, hey, get your ass in a classroom. Like, you are not cut out for learning online. It's not what you should be doing. It's not good for your learning. You personally, knowing your learner profile, you need to be in a classroom. There are people who are the opposite, you know, where it's actually this classroom setting isn't right for you, you need another one. But it's that just automatic, because it's right in their face, like the moment it gets hard, language trauma, that actually is really detrimental to their learning. And I just wish we could have more nuanced conversations. Hope we get there one day, but I don't think New Zealanders, Aotearoa, is quite ready for those nuances yet. We're still very much, maybe it's in the validation stage. Maybe that's where we're at, and we'll move past it. I hope we don't get locked into this, like there is no escape, because there so is.
So for someone that is feeling like they can't move past it and they want to learn but it's just hindering them, which I've heard a lot, and I felt like that too, and my whakaaro has always been like, people can give you the tools, can tell you all these things to make you feel good and stuff, but the person that's ultimately going to push forward and make the change, it has to come from yourself. What advice would you give someone that is feeling like that right now? Like, what kind of things can they do for themselves to push them through the barrier to get to the learning part? Like, if they're just sitting there like, I've had all this language trauma happen to me all my life and I want to learn my language, but I just am struggling right now.
I think that's so cool of you to ask that. And it's so individual, like it really, really is. But really common ones that come up are people have what I call a Google mentality for fluency. So there is, in this world of everything must be instant, if it's not instant, it's wrong. And I call it the Google mentality because Google's instant. Like, you can put in whatever you want. And so people assume that because that's the way the world is now, that my brain is that. So if I'm not automatically fluent, the second I Google it in my brain to be fluent, I'm messed up. There's something wrong with me. I'm doing it wrong. And it's just not true. Like, the language trauma part is that we have to grapple with the fact that we will spend our lives learning our language. That's the traumatic part. The traumatic part isn't that it's hard and that it takes longer than the 1 second Google. That's the traumatic part. And I think people maybe like mix up the two. We can still go down the path of learning and acquiring and still be angry about that bit. Because I'm still mad about that, like, you know, and so those are the things, like the nuanced conversations, we just need to split apart just a little bit. So that's the first thing is, honestly, like, do you understand that fluency isn't like a millisecond? If not, like, you really need to work to understand it, because it's just not, and it's going to take you ages, and you can be angry about that. That's the trauma part. This bit over here, we still have to push forward. Because if you keep here and let that anger stop that, then you're not ever gonna progress. And progression is how we, you know, come to terms with that. That's the first one, is fluency. Also understanding that fluency is fully like a colonial concept, and the whole idea of us needing to be equal or stable bilinguals. There's like probably less than 10 Māori speakers who are equal, stable bilinguals. The rest of us are perfectly normal bilinguals, and we have an off-kilter proficiency, and that is the same as 99% of bilinguals, multilinguals around the world. They all have a different capacity of language in their languages. So, you know, getting over that hump that you are not meant to speak Māori like you speak English. It's not a thing that until you get to like Shakespeare level, and until you're like our leading translator in the Māori world, then maybe, but you don't need to be that. You just need to be you. And so the trauma part is understanding that we should have had that access. But the trauma part is not that we can't move along in the chain. And then the last bit is understanding that it's probably going to take way longer than people realize, and coming to terms with that sucks. Like, it's so hard. Probably 4 generations. I want to speak Māori with my kids. I won't even see the fruition. That's the traumatic bit. I won't see the full fruits of my labour until my great grandchildren, and I won't be here for that. That sucks. But it doesn't stop you from doing this. So I think those are really important, that we have to make sure that the language trauma conversations we have aren't the gate, the fence, the barrier, that there is something that we can be mad about over here while we keep plodding along. And it's really important that we find our way to that. I don't see us there like in a big way yet, And I'm imagining that that might take ages. So those are the chats that I usually have with people, are about getting them to try and see the two things coexisting, with it in mind that this one will eventually help us to curb that feeling, to a point that we can still deal with it,
Yeah.
move past it. Yeah.
Because I feel like it will always be there, but if you're working on it, you're just not giving it as much power as you once did, and it's not stopping you from living your life anymore the way that you want to live it.
I've seen people give it out as well, like give it to people who were up until that point not that affected. They were like, okay, this part sucks, that's real stink, but sitting in that silo becomes like that's the way Māori learners are meant to feel, so I'm meant to feel like that, so I'm going to feel like that too.
This is part of my
journey.
Is
part of it,
I have to feel it in order
to... And that's not... I don't know that's a great outcome for us.
I would never want that for anyone.
Nah, and I do try as hard as I can to not let that happen in my work setting, but also in our relationship setting, that I want you to have really positive experiences, and I want to have positive ones too, and I want the kids who are around us to have positive experiences. And we talk a lot about that with using commands, and when you're directing people, and that's when your language use comes out. Clean your room. And every second resource that I see online is commands. It's be quiet, clean your room, sit down, stand up. It's actually those little scenarios too. That's when you use those commands as language.
It's so interesting.
Not always the greatest thing. Trauma-inducing.
You're so right, because I can't think of a time where I've seen an Instagram post of phrases in a language where it's like, I'm proud of you, translation. I love you, translation.
Yeah. Just that. Just positive.
Yeah.
Do you think, and this doesn't have to be like about like me, but it can be if you want, because I'm strong enough to take it. Do you think that it's possible that a couple or a partner can be an instigator for language trauma, and is that something that couples should think about and maybe like talk about more? Like, can we give it to each other?
Yes, I think so. I have never felt it from you, but have in the past, where I've told people the way that I like to learn, the way I want to be communicated with, and have asked them straight up, like, how would you, and this is language stuff too, how would you like to have these conversations? But ultimately, when they started, everything that I'd asked from them went out the window, and then it became one person taking control of the conversation, talking at me, I'm getting things wrong, getting corrected, and being spoken to in a way that just didn't make me feel good. And so I'm definitely from experience can say that couples can make each other feel a certain way, But yeah, I think communication really is key in having, like, we've talked so much about having conversations early, but I think when you're with, I think it's really important to not only have the conversations early, but to keep checking in with each other, which you do often. And I really appreciate that. Like, and I think, not to say just because I told you all my stink experiences in the beginning, like, this has happened to me, and I don't want to feel like that anymore. And that's not to say I'll never have that again in my life, because it will still happen. I'll still have people talking to me in a certain way, or acting a certain way towards me.
In a way that induces a language trauma.
Yeah. And I think that will just happen for the rest of my life, because why would it stop? But it's just how I deal with it as an adult, and with like little tools that I might pick up along the way. Like the way that I react to it might be different, but I think I feel really lucky to be with someone like you who has a lot of tools, and you've taught me a lot about communicating in a language space that makes me feel really safe, to a point like I never with a partner used to throw out sentences in another language because I felt really nervous about it, or they might be like, say it, and then I'd be like, oh, like why? Then now it's a test. I don't like the feeling of being tested by someone, and I just automatically feel like I'm going to be wrong. Yeah,
that's definitely a language trauma-y thing, is it's the being tested, or the fear of being tested, which means that you're not having a conversation in that language. There's something else going on. It's a examination of
how good you are,
cultural knowledge, cultural competency, which is in itself, funnily enough, I think, a projection of language trauma too. You know, it's like you were saying, it's happened for ages. Why would it stop now? And it's because like there's all this like projection, you know.
And some of the people that have induced this trauma in me are still in my life, and I think in a lot of ways I don't think they know that they're doing it, or they don't know how it's making others feel, because sometimes it's not just to me. But I was never in a space to call it out. I just took it, felt like shit, went home, dealt with it, moved on with my life, happened again, and then that was my cycle. That was my silo, but I was working through it, and I've had to do that all my life.
And that's a silo. That's a cycle that comes without language progression. You know, you're not gonna learn language through those experiences. You know, they don't. That whole idea of you know, if we keep being horrible or harsh on people, they will turn around and learn it. It's actually not true. People don't act for language primarily through being asked questions, like, you know, being given a test, you know, and then failing the test because you were set up to fail it, and then them just going, you know, hea te mate, you know, what's the matter?
And even if you do answer it correctly, a lot of the time they'll still find something to nitpick about it.
Because
so
you were meant to fail
it's like a lose-lose thing. And
it doesn't make you.
No, that is mean language anxiety for me.
Even as a like a medium proficiency speaker, or however you want to call it, because I hate the word fluent. I feel like certain events that might happen, and you've never done this, but other partners have, or not even partners, just like people in general, have like nominated me for stuff. And so that's something that when we go to events now, you've never done this, but when we go to events, I get worried, I get fearful, and I get anxious that I'm going to be nominated to commit some act in Māori that I'm not ready for. And so because I'm not at the upper echelons of proficiency, there's still stuff that I've got to learn. There are, like I remember hearing real beautiful, proficient speakers saying you should always go ready. You should always go prepared to speak. And I agree with them on that sentiment, and I do try. But there are some really intense events that happen in life, like around death and burial and, being at urupa, and there are still things that I don't know and things that I'm not equipped to handle. So even if I go as prepared as I possibly can, I still know that there's just stuff I don't know. But people expect that you know.
I know.
And so they nominate you for stuff. And then you're nominated in the moment, and then you find yourself like on the urupa doing karakia that you know you shouldn't be doing, but you have no other option because in the moment you've just been chucked. And so those are things that I still, I get like, what's going to happen?
I feel nervous for you in those situations because I like half expect it to come. And on one hand, I think you're really awesome that you have the capability to be pulled into something like that, because I'm not nowhere near that sort of level. But on the other hand, I don't think sad is the right word, but I feel aroha for you because you've got this language, and sometimes, like, I know you'll do so much for the language, but and on the marae, like, that's a really beautiful place to use it and things, but when it's like Vinny knows te reo, I will grab him to do this thing, or I'll ask him to do this thing. Like, even sometimes I feel nervous or reluctant to tell people what you do, because I don't want people to put that in their back pocket and try and pull you into do stuff. Because I've had people be like, oh, can Vinny do this thing for me or for my work or blah blah blah. So it doesn't even go to you, it comes to me. And a lot of it, like, I don't even ask you, I just say no for you, because I'm like, he's not just like a dialer Māori, like, and that freaks me out for you, because I was like, I would hate that for myself, to just be the guy that just gets caught up. Oh, when is it? Tomorrow. Oh, last minute. Oh, for free? Oh, okay. Like, that's...
I think that there is something to unpack there about, like, but that's racism. Just straight up, that's racism. Like, when people do that, and when they just say, he will do it because I will, force him to, because he's Māori, so I will come over the top and just assert my authority, which doesn't exist. That authority doesn't exist. But I think the language trauma stuff is the expectation that because I can communicate in Māori, I am therefore equipped to be a priest, to bury a dead body, to do those things. And the trauma bit for me is that I know that if I said to that person, go karanga then. If I'm doing this, if we're all in this together doing things we don't know how to do, off you go then. And I know that they won't.
Yeah.
And so that's the traumatic bit, is the feeling I get that they are cool to throw me to the wolves, but won't do it themselves. And that's actually, that's a language trauma thing that I still, because it's happened so many times, that now when I encounter a situation, I'm scared for, what might happen. And that's something that comes from people who maybe don't speak Māori, or, you know, so it's not like they're doing it to be horrible, but I'm only bringing it up because there's an assumption that once you can speak Māori, there is no more language trauma, but it's actually just like a series of evolving events, which is why it's so important to be more nuanced about, you know, these kinds of conversations, because we're all going to be confronted by different, you know, different
So it's
settings.
new traumas.
Yeah, like new things come up, and it's really, really important that we don't sit in, you know, we might spend 20 years sitting in the I can't learn because language trauma. And then finally, when you're 80, you might finally learn. And then you realize that there's a whole big thing to unpack. You know, and then you realize that you've been giving out language trauma to other people because you haven't realized, you know, so there's all those things that happen as well. And racism is a part of language trauma. So I have a random question, but it's got a bit of a backstory. Can I read it?
Yes.
I feel like I have lots of quick fixes for language trauma stuff because I know that it's not always language trauma. You know, and sometimes that really pisses my students off. Like, so I'll be sitting in a class and they'll be like, language trauma is stopping me from, you know, learning Māori. And I'll be like, okay, cool, like let's have a cup of tea and a chat. And anyway, we'll have a cup of tea and a chat, and then I'll find out that actually they're just learning vocab in a way that you can't learn vocab. Like, it doesn't work. So they would have spent the last like 5-6 years maybe learning vocabulary a certain way, and it might be writing them out 100 times. It might be using flashcards, or it might be you know, creating your own dictionary. Like, there's lots of ways to learn it, but different people need different things. And so they might have been using flashcards for 6 years, and then they're like, Vinny, I've got language trauma, I can't learn Māori. And it actually works out that actually flashcards just suck for them and they shouldn't be doing it. When I tell them that, it like pisses them off and makes them really angry because they've spent so long with this one problem, calling it this one thing, and it became a really big problem. Like, if someone was around to just go, oi, flashcards, not for you, mate, don't use them, you know, you shouldn't, not you, for this person, cool, not you. But it became a really massive thing to the point that it was like language trauma, which is, by that time, you're pretty much at the stop sign. And sometimes when you ask me questions, I'm like scared to give you the quick fix because I don't, like, my students get, like, they would get genuinely mad and it would take them ages to unpack it.
Okay.
And I'm like, sometimes I'm like, should I have just left them with the flashcard? And so, like, as your partner, I'm like sometimes scared to give you like a quick fix, because I don't want it to like upset you. And in a relationship, it could like shut you down. And I don't want to do that. And so my question was, what do I do?
So have you purposely not given me answers for things, or have you and just waited for the outcome?
Sometimes I like try and like not like say it outright, but like it might be like a little language tip or whatever. And I think my inclination is like, oh, one day when we do like passives, we'll talk about it, or you know, something like that.
So in that situation, are you not seeing me as your partner? You're putting me as...
I don't know. I'm asking. I think I'm asking how you want me to see you, you know?
My thing has always been, and I've always told you this, even just with our relationship in general, if I'm going to ask you a question, even if the answer is going to be hard, or maybe not even an answer I want to hear, if I can ask you it, I'm willing to hear the answer and be okay with it.
So like, I think that's really cool. And I think we have mentioned a really good point around that of like, I love it when you ask, because it means that I've got permission to like share something. But if you were like learning language and you were using like flashcards, and I was like, you're not a flashcards person, should I tell you? Because you know what I mean? Like, because you could be like, don't fucking tell me what to do.
So I feel like we're kind of like, I think we talked about it in a past podcast where when we're checking in with each other and how we like to learn and things like that, I don't want you to come to me as a teacher unless I ask you to. So and I had said to you what I really love about you when I maybe say something to you in Māori and it's wrong and you don't correct me, you give me alternative ways, or it's the way that you say it that makes me feel really good. I would probably want you to tell me after I'd finished.
Okay.
Or if I said to you, like, I'm struggling, I would absolutely come to you and just be like, I don't know if I'm doing it wrong, or if like this is not for me, because I want more than one way of doing something. Like, I'm a very visual learner, and I would try a visual way first, but maybe in a language setting, maybe that's not right for me. And so I'd want to know multiple ways of learning and then find the one that works for me. So I would probably come and ask you.
That's cool.
But I would wait I would probably wait for the conversation to be one where you could be like, rather than, that's not for you, be like, I don't want you to tell me it's not for me. I just probably be like, what about these ways? Like, this might work for you, or you might find this easier. Like, if you see something like that, I'd be like, oh yeah.
That's cool. I'm only asking because those are like those little things where you can like begin a language trauma pathway if you're not too careful, and I want to manaki you like through that, which is that's cool.
Because if you don't pick your words carefully, I'll be put back in that spot I was talking about, and then I'll get all these bombs.
And then I am mate.
And then your face gets put in the domino. And every time I see flashcards, I get triggered.
Exactly, it's so true. Last language trauma question is, when it comes to all of these chats that we have about language trauma, like, what do you think the point is of us having them? Like, how te wawata, what are we supposed to get out of these? What's the dream when we have these chats? Like, what are we chasing what is the solve that we're chasing when we open up a nation to talking about language trauma?
I think people that say that they're experiencing language trauma, I think they need to like unpick it, but they also have to think about what they want. Like, you have to at one point decide that you either want the language or you don't. Like, you can't say your whole life, I want the language, but you have to say, I want the language, and then you've got it. Like, if language trauma is going to stop you from learning, which a lot of people have, if you've decided that for the rest of your life you're just not going to learn, you've decided that, and that's okay. And the rest is for you to unpack. But if you're like, I've got all this trauma, but I want to learn, like, you've decided that, so that's there. Then you have to find ways to work to that point. And it's not to say that there's one solve for everybody. You have to find what works for yourself. Whether that is sitting in those silos, and which is important too. Like, that could be helpful for someone
The validation.
to feel like, I'm not the only one that feels like that, and that's really great. I don't feel alone anymore. Cool. It could be talking to someone that had similar experiences but isn't there anymore. Cool, this person has worked through it. What did they do? Let's have a kōrero about that. Maybe I can do that. It could be even seeking professional help. It could be talking to your teachers, talking to your whānau. I don't think that there's one fix. So if you've decided that you want to learn the language, you have to, at one point, wake up one day and be like, cool, like I can't be in this hole anymore. I have to find a way out. And you just got to keep looking until you find the one that works for you.
I reckon you're right. Like, I think that there'll be some things where they are leaning down like the path of other whānau experiences or life experiences, and sometimes you might need like a little more than just a language person, you know, which in my experience is like people come in like full on trauma dump, and I'm like, I'm just a language dude. And what you've told me actually is like it has escalated way beyond that, but now you're like demanding I fix it for you. And not only is that not fair on me, but it's also not fair on you because I can't do that for you. So like, you're so right, there'll be some times where people need to go and like take this little bit of their language trauma and like just see a professional to help them unpack that. Like, I think that's so true. But I, you know, in the main, I feel like the goal of having any chat about language trauma should always be, it should always have it in mind that you want to be able to have that same chat in Māori one day, because like we know, those things, they don't actually go away. Like, you don't erase an experience that you've had, so you're always going to carry it, but it's one day I'll be able to reimagine this existence and execute this existence and have all these experiences and discuss these experiences through the medium of Māori. And I think that's so important, because it's how people, I think, can move a little bit along to reimagining themselves as a Māori speaker, because so often the language trauma is the blockade. And it's got to eventually be one thing that one day it's part of your lived experience, but it's something that you can now define and talk about in Māori because you haven't let it stop you. And that's not to say that that's not like super difficult, but I do think it's got to be the ultimate, like any trauma discussion, it's got to have that at the end of it for me. Otherwise, I'm not sure that it's, you know, a really fruitful discussion that's going to help you move beyond there, you know, unless it's that validation thing and you actually, at that point, like a good vent, you know, do you need vent or advice? Do you need to vent or do you need advice? If it's the, I just need it to be valid, then that's cool. It can just be that. But it can't be the blockade forever, you know.
Maybe even thinking of what triggers you to feel a certain way. Like, it might be certain people, or it could be a particular place. And that's not to say that you have to cut them out. Maybe you do, or maybe you just back off from them for a bit while you do your reflection and your work on yourself.
I reckon I like the idea of pulling your energy out of that, but putting it in another space where you are comfortable. So like, just the backing out is one thing, but I quite like the idea of, like, you know, with my language planning stuff, where it's like, okay, we're going to pull you out of that space over there, but we're going to replace your language experience from there, which hasn't been positive, with your own one in a new environment where you set the boundaries and you set the rules and you set the tikanga and you also set the language. So you learn it, you teach it yourself, you find it yourself, and you gear it yourself, and it becomes this real wholesome thing. And you know, if you do that in one context, 2, 3, 4, 5 over time, then eventually that becomes one experience that used to be your only experience. Now you've got 40, and that's
so true.
one. And you've got 39 over here that are way more wholesome, and I think those are good things. Language planning is the next puni pahu. So we'll be coming back to talk about it a bit more.
Cool. The language expert, joined by the doctor.
Next time on the puni pahu. Next time on Tū Kapu Tū Kōrero. Hikitia te rongo mai whiti o tēnei kōrero o tēnei wānanga. Tukua kia ea, tukua kia oi, korangi kei runga ko papa kei raro. Tūruki whakataha ngā taumaha, ngā ārai, ngā mamai o te ako I te reo Māori ki rāha ki haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Tū Kapu Tū Kōrero. That was just a little karakia to lift any heaviness you might have felt from our chats. Let us know what you think of what we've talked about today. You can find us on socials. Like our stuff and share it with your lovers and friends. Talk to them about these things. And check out any links we might post to things we've talked about in this episode. We love hearing your feedback so long as it's based on a platform of high and reciprocal mana, but you need to approach us as your friends, not as experts. Remember what we asked for at the start of this episode. Meet us where we are at in this discussion that can be really highly emotive. As always, a massive shout out to the Matawai and the team at āta, without whom this podcast would not have been possible. E te whare o te Matawai, ngā rangatira o āta, tēnei māua e mihi atu nei. In our next episode, we're going to dive right into the nerd stuff, language planning. It's where we are going to turn our attention to all of those practical steps that you need to dive in and change the language choice of your home. Can we do it? Let's find out in the next episode of Tū Kapu Tū Kōrero.